Hey everybody, this is Brian.
And this is Josh.
Welcome to the podcast for Curiosity Continuum.
Curiosity Continuum is an industry-innovating, non-traditional company passionate about growing wisdom in the next generation.
We are the essential bridge between the analog and digital worlds by building collaborative communities that unleash the power of adaptive expertise and innovation needed to thrive in the 21st century.
We combine and mix essential elements needed to empower people to succeed in new ways, not possible outside of a creative, thoughtful, diverse community of fellow curious people.
Follow us on your favorite podcast app to receive notifications of new content. If you like what you hear and want to dive deeper, visit us at curiositycontinuum.com. Thanks for tuning in. Let's start the conversation. When people ask me, how did you think of that? I often, until recently, was, my brain just kind of does that. Now, some people might say, well, there's something wrong with the brain, which have had a
Which
set about
is
me
probably true, but, it is what it is.
Here I am, folks.
Yeah.
What's happened in me is I've become aware of the cornucopia of things that inform how I think. Now, here's a great way to kind of come into this construct, and then this is where I want Josh to join. When you have a priority or a goal, you said, this is my goal, and this is like the most important thing that I'm doing over the course of a particular period of time. However, in the creative mind, when you want to do something different around a goal, nothing's most important. And so I tend to grab for the junk drawer of those recesses of my mind, but that's the practice. I realize that most people don't try to randomly grab something that they don't see as related.
Okay, so I would like you to kind of like direct me where you want me to go with this, because I could go many different ways.
Okay.
Like, what are you
thinking?
thinking?
So let me clarify for folks, because I tend to do this myself. When I did I like playing with Legos. I don't do it nearly as much as I would like to. In fact, I don't really do it at all. And that's a sad note. I need to play with Legos more. I can steal some of my son's old Legos from the garage. Here's really what I think about in that system. I understand that I'm playing with Legos. I don't necessarily have to build anything in particular. It's just an open plate.
Right.
Sometimes I don't know what I want to do until I've put a few things together. And it doesn't even have to make sense. It's just something that I start in motion. And I don't say, if I grab this piece, this is the type of piece I'm looking for always. It's like, that's the piece I grabbed. Can I make it work? Now, I think what happens with people is that they self-filter so quickly about, no, that would never work. Or they would go,
yeah,
like this, no, why would I do that? That makes no sense. If you just flip that one question to say, how could I make this make sense? That all of a sudden now the possibilities open. And you're not thinking in terms of right and wrong. You're just thinking about, oh, how could I make that work? And that's the active thing that engages the brain, I believe. It's, if you say, no, it doesn't work, you just shut off. Right? Well, that's the end of that. But if you stay engaged and say, how could I make that work? That makes no sense. Is there any way I could do 6 degrees of separation to bring it together or something? To me, that's interesting. And
right.
I do that oftentimes because I don't know how to solve the problems, but I do. Because I have a way I approach creative problem solving.
Sure. So, like, what we're talking about really is adaptive problem solving, but in like using knowledge that you have gained before to push yourself forward through a solution to a problem that you don't really know, or that you maybe don't know existed until like that day. And so you didn't really have time to research it, but you're like, wow, what can I pull out from my past to help me in my current situation and then push me into the future, right? And I think this is something that we talk about often. It's contextual awareness. It's critical thinking. It's just the stuff that you're supposed to just kind of know how to do. But a lot of people don't practice it. And so, like Brian's saying, like a lot of people will just give up. They'll just say, no, it's not going to work, instead of trying it. I always think, like, if you try and fail and we've talked about this before, it's much more valuable than if you just try or don't try at all, for one, or if you try and you just get it right away. Because if you try and fail, it requires you to like look inward and say, okay, what did I do? What was the problem? And maybe it's something stupid, like, putting dishes away or something, and you're got like too many dishes left. And you're like, what? These all went in this cupboard when we took them out. Why doesn't it go back? Right? That's like a simple, maybe like, I put these plates in a different place. I didn't put them before. So that might be a whole nother thing. But I think sometimes it can be pretty serious. It can be like things that are happening in your life. And you're like, why is this not working? Or, there's an emergency situation and you have to figure it out. And a lot of people do give up. And I think that's where they get into problems, like big problems. And I think if we can even teach just the kind of idea that it's okay to try and try it. Because what do you have to lose at some points, right? It's not a life or death situation. It's just like, you're not a doctor saying, how do I do this? Of course, you're not going to do that. Like in an ER situation. Right. But like, this is like, I need to fix my car, and I know I can watch a YouTube video on it, but I don't really have the skills, but I have the tools. I got a bunch of time. What's the worst that could happen? I mean, the car doesn't run now, right? Now, you could really screw stuff up, but then you just would call the guy and have the guy come over and fix it for you. And you're going to pay the guy either way. So maybe you might want to like try to learn a new skill and maybe that one time in high school, you watched your dad or helped your grandfather or something with a car and you kind of know something. Like, why don't you pull that kind of confidence out and just try it, right? I have done so many things like that in my life just by trying it. And
so I want to talk.
Doesn't work,
that. Can I,
all the time.
Let me interject this. Josh loves retro games, as many of you know who've been loyal listeners to this podcast. There's a game that he played called The Dig, which is this Steven Spielberg game, right? From the 90s, I believe.
Yeah.
Is it?
I'm not really sure if it's Steven Spielberg. I think it is, like, or directed, like, kind of by him or whatever, but yeah.
Okay. This game was played on retro hardware. Now, in my adventures, there was a lot of businesses at the time he came into this computer that were getting rid of computers that were old enough to play the game. A lot of these were business machines in like organizations and companies where they didn't need the like latest cutting technology. They needed stable hardware to run certain things until it got so old.
Just didn't work
They pulled it off
anymore.
and they shoved it in a closet. It still was a perfectly good computer that had no practical use in the modern business. Fabulous applications in the retro gaming world. So,
right.
Just as a note, if you're looking for old computers, go to businesses and see if you can buy them or take them off their hands, because they're probably fully depreciated at that point, and you can get probably free up some space for them, and they'll be happy.
Yeah, and I think we kind of missed that window, just so you know, like with that, because they all pretty much switched over to new computers like 5 years ago. But you still might get lucky. Like, they might have some in the back room or whatever that they don't want.
Josh played this thing on retro hardware, but he streamed it on Twitch.
Yes.
So if you really think about that, you have a computer that's not internet ready.
No.
But he played it on. He streamed it on the internet from that computer. Now, can you tell people how you figured that out?
Well, yeah. I mean, I used a capture card, which is a hardware for a new computer that will capture the device output of another device. So the display output, right? So I used, I used my current computer that I had, the one that actually is like the new computer that I have, not the new one I have now, but a new computer. And I hooked up the old computer to the capture card, streamed a software called OBS or XSplit, if people are wanting to know which software I used. Which, what it does is it puts on my new computer, it puts a little like screen, and it shows what the other computer is outputting. And then I can log into Twitch on my computer and then output that screen. So basically using two different computers to play one from the old one to the new one to the internet. And then on my new computer, I had another monitor, which I had like all the chat. So if people were talking to me, I could do that. And that was good. So I did that. And I had really no other issue other than that. And so that's what Brian's talking about, how I streamed it from one PC to another to another. And you're back. So so through the magic of editing this software, you won't even notice this. But basically, Brian, I just went through the whole thing, how I did it. And so we're to the point now where you're like, oh yeah, that's great. That's cool.
There was not a way. There's many wrong ways to stream stuff to the internet, and the proof in the pudding is it didn't work. Here's what I want to tell people. Sometimes it's not the perfect solution. It's just a solution. You'd be amazed at how many people make their life on a solution that's okay, that actually solves a problem. And it's a replicatable problem by people because they want the help in solving that problem as well. Now, when you think about the world of an engineer, which Josh was on the track to kind of do that and chose a different life adventure, a lot of times people recognize the engineers as the innovators in society, and oftentimes they are. There's a lot of math and there's a lot of science that goes into it. But Josh, can you talk about the creative engines that engineers use in order to get into that headspace to innovate something like electric cars, for example, or...
I mean, really, the first thing an engineer is using is their imagination. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. The math, the science, all that just comes later. You have an idea, and that's why science fiction I always thought was so powerful, because those were the ideas. Like, those were the creative ideas. I always think that a lot of engineers are very creative people, but a lot aren't too. A lot of them are very statistical, analytical people that just want to figure out how to make stuff, but they need the idea. And like I said, some of them are more like me, where they're kind of like the hybrid of the idea person and to make it work. But a lot of them are just the make it work people. And they read a lot of books and they just think about stuff. They talk to a lot of people. And if you're in like NASA, for example, that's what those guys do and women do. Those men and women do. Sit around and talk, and they're like making the thing happen, but from their imagination. If you don't have the imagination for it, what are you doing there basically?
So talk to me about what you didn't find reinforced in your formal education as an engineer that was missing, because I'll just say what I'm thinking right now. As much as there are science and math jobs, that to me isn't the point. The point is that that's a required skill set in order to back certain things that do require the creativity.
Yeah, and I mean, like when I went to college, it was the math, the science. It wasn't the creative. It was, you're doing this. And it was always like, here's the problem, figure the solution. And they never really talked about the creative aspect of it. That was just something you just kind of understood, I think. And I think that's why a lot of people just didn't really grasp onto that concept that much. Like if I would have spent half of my time in learning the engineering, the science and everything, like in art classes and stuff, that would have been fun. Or taking creative writing course or something else. To kind of backstop, because the problem is when you're in an engineering field, like any kind of high-end mathematics or science, that's all it is. And it really does become very regimented, and it's very hard to break out of that rut, really, of that. And you're giving all these problems because you're in this academic setting. So like they're giving you all the problems and you're just using math and science to solve them. You're not really coming up with super creative ways to do it. It's just like, Johnny is traveling on a train and he's trying to figure out how this works and how does this work, or how do you build this airplane? Like it's going this fast, or there's this in space, there's, gravitational forces and all that stuff. You're figuring all that stuff out. It's very intimidating to people, but all you're doing is crunching numbers. And I think that you really do need to recharge that creative part of your brain. And they just don't do, like, at least when I went, they just didn't really do that. They kind of expect you to do that on your own.
Okay, so I'm sorry, folks, if I say so a lot these days because there's many things I'm trying to think through. Help me out here, Josh. When you're looking at where we are today, do you find that there's not the same foundational creativity for people coming into these industries?
I think, like, when I look at what's happening today, right? A lot of these people are going into these fields, or even if they're not, there's really not as many people going into like engineering, mathematics, all that were when we were going there, right? But there are still people doing that. Those people are really the cream of the crop of people like in that field. And they're probably going to get, you would think that most of those people would get those jobs, right? That would be looking for those high-end tech jobs at like Boeing or NASA. But there are also a lot of people going that I don't really think really need to go. Like, they probably just don't know what else to do. And so I always think, like, maybe we should do a better job of separating out the truly people that really would excel in those programs to the ones that maybe want like kind of like more of a creative, hybridized kind of outlet, because we need those jobs too. Like, we need the engineers. We also need the designers, though. We need the people to, design. They're still good paying jobs. They're just not the math part of it. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling now at this point because I'm not really. It's more of a commentary on where society is than anything. Because in some episodes, we always talk about how people just expected to go to college. So people go. And if you were a kid and you were good at math and science, like, oh, you could be an engineer. But when they really get into it, I don't think a lot of people really, really enjoy that.
If I had chosen to be an engineer, now, before I ever wanted to be a doctor,
Yeah.
go way back in time, I wanted to be an engineer. It was actually a mechanical engineer because I loved watching how things work.
Yeah.
Never would have made it through calculus in college. Wouldn't have done it. If I did, I never wanted to just know the process and follow it. I had to understand why. And that's what I struggled with in calculus. I could do the equation, right? But I didn't understand why I was doing the equation. And at that point, that kind of hit the upper limit for me on what kinds of math I would use. In my business life and a lot of my career, I use a lot of numbers, a lot. And I have to be putting in, I have to put in all these assumptions and I have to define how the assumptions work. So I'm kind of engineering how numbers work in, like, those type of spreadsheets or models. But it's never because I wanted to put a number.
But you're doing
on
it creatively. So like, you found the hybridized version of what you wanted to do. And I think that that's where a lot of people are getting stopgapped. So like, if they're going to engineering, they're just like, I'm an engineer. I'm just going to do that. Instead of like what you did, like in high school, you said, okay, this is how far I can go in math. That, like, even if it wasn't like conscious decision at that point, you were like, okay, I'm not going to do this because if this is the first level, I got to go like 9 more levels. It's just not going to happen. So, but
I nominate Joshua LeGrew to take my spot.
But you really figured it out, though. You were like, okay, I can do that level of math. So now I'm going not up, but I'm pivoting sideways. So instead of the step forward, you took a step to the side. But you're still at the same level. You didn't go back. And I think that's what people need to understand. Like, you could take your skill to a certain point, and then maybe you just can't go above that. And so you're like, okay, how do I sidestep this and use the skill I've already learned to push myself to a new height and something else? And that's what we're talking about with this whole thing.
I will kind of end my contribution here with this thought. I had a lot of successful people say, I wasn't the best at it. I just kept doing it.
Yeah.
Kept showing up. Like, for an animator or a designer or whatever the profession may be. You can, but they achieve a level of greatness. Let's just be honest. Like in athletics, you have to have a certain athletic propensity to be even to participate at pro levels and things, right? But the talent component of it is something where you would realize even like where you're best on that particular team. If it's like American football, you're a quarterback, you're a kicker, you're a running back. Those are about 3 positions that I know, folks. So you've seen them. But those positions require very different things. And those teams successful, there's not one position that wins, but the team wins games. They win Super Bowls, they win whatever. My challenge to you is, where have you felt like your talent has maxed out, where that may not be the tip of the spear anymore? How do you retake that talent and move it? And it's the same fulfillment you would get, but it's a new.
And I would cap this by saying, think of your skills like members of a team. You can have a lot of one thing, but then you're going to need something else. So what can I augment this other skill with to, push myself even farther than I could have gone without it, right?
We'll put a comma here for now. Until next time, this is Brian.
And this is Josh.
For Curiosity Continued.